My name's Ida Rademacher. I work at the Aspen Institute, looking across a lot of the work here on issues of inclusive economy. And we've had a lot of different sessions over the course of the Aspen Ideas Festival this year on different ways of taking a slice of looking at how to grow an economy and grow the ways that it works for everybody. And today is a special lens with a special group of women leaders on women investing in women. And the kind of meat of the conversation we're going to get into will, in our hope and prep, was really starting to think about this conversation is not new, but there's a lot of reasons why it has to become even more urgent and opportunistic, and the women on top of this issue on the stage here are some of the catalysts for bringing this conversation into new rooms. So I'm excited to get into that with all of you. Let me just introduce the three of them, and then I'll do a little context setting, and then we can get into conversation. First, I'll start at the far end. It's Felecia Hatcher, who, for those of you who don't know her, is the CEO of Black Ambition Opportunity. There is a lot more in her bio about the other different levers you have pulled and markets you have shaped with your investing and your leadership. But thank you for being here. In the middle with us, we have Brynne McNulty Rojas, who I'm just excited to have been learning from as we've prepped for this. Brynne is the co-founder and CEO of Hobby, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's a leading residential technology company in Latin America, and she's the only founder and CEO of a unicorn company in Latin America. So congratulations with that. And I think the other hat that's especially exciting here as well is the role that you play on strategic engagement for the McNulty Foundation. And we do a lot of exciting work at the Aspen Institute with you and your family, so thanks for being here for that. And also Dalila Wilson-Scott, who I've had the privilege of knowing with several of the hats that she's worn over the years and learned from. She's the Executive Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer for Comcast Corporation. And so with all three women here on stage and the variety of hats you've worn, we're going to invite all of them to be put on at different stages in the conversation today. A couple of context pieces for the women investing in women conversation. You know, there's two, different, in my mind, polar realities, which is on the one hand, we're all seeing the data that over the next 10 years with an $85 trillion wealth transfer, 30 trillion of that is going to land in the hands of women. And what does that mean when women are becoming even more, have more resources at their disposal for a variety of different kinds of investments in capital markets? At the same time, when we look at the median net worth of women in the United States today, the median net worth of an African-American woman in this country is $1,700. That means that over half of the population has, well, I wouldn't say half the population, but we know that a large percentage of people are actually in net debt. And there's a way that the understanding about how much resources women have and how we support their ability to have stability and resilience and opportunity flows into a sense of how they can play a much more bigger material role, not only as being workers in the economy with the ability to be stable and thrive, but as real drivers of capital markets in their leadership in the world of ownership and investing. So those two things are what we're grappling with, and these three women are doing incredible, building incredible impact strategies around connecting the dots between the resources flowing to women and the ways that you support women in becoming an even bigger part of the economy. So I guess I want to start with the conversation around that idea of women as investors in their own right, or women having capital. One of the things we talked about was when you give women money, they use it differently. So I wonder, with a sense, first and foremost, of your philanthropic hat, what you might say when you give women money philanthropically to put into play. What is different about that work? Do you want to start first?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. First I'll just say, because I think this is important to say, many of these conversations focus on the barriers that many women have. Yeah. But I'm proud, despite all of those barriers, I'm proud and celebrate every day that I'm an African American, Asian American woman, and I wouldn't change it for anything. So let me start there. But on the philanthropic side, I think what we know is, and WPI, the Women's Philanthropy Institute at IU, which many of you may know, they're the ones who did the Women Give study, sort of tracks philanthropic giving to women and girls. A couple years ago, they released this study in addition to their research that talked about how women give. So women are more likely to be in donor collaboratives and giving funds. Many people may know Women Moving Millions or Women's Funding Network. They're sort of investing in community and trying to figure out how do we work together, leverage together, learn from one another. The other thing is they typically invest their philanthropic resources, commercial resources, other financial capital, as well as their political support tends to all align in values. And you don't see that generally in other genders, and I think that's important. So always looking for that leverage and always being thoughtful about how all the different platforms a woman may have to leverage are important to pull together.
Yeah. Please just jump in on this. And Brynne, do you want to go next in terms of the...
So first, thank you for having me. It's very exciting to be here. I've been coming to the Ideas Festival for close to 2 decades probably, and it's an honor to participate in it, and especially in the McNulty room. So I'm excited to be here, and thank you. What we have seen at the McNulty Foundation is when you put money in the hands of women, really amazing things happen, and it is immediate and measurable. And as you said, it's often invested in homes, families, and communities in a way that has ripple effects for generations to come. And we've seen it from examples of women weavers in the Himalayas to Jackson, Mississippi, to Guatemala. When you have women become owners of their own capital, whether it's they become their own kind of entrepreneurs or they become part of collectives or simply through cash transfers, as we've seen in Jackson, Mississippi, people are able to have really measurable impacts, and they start to become more relevant members of society and get more significant political roles. In their households, they start sending their girls to school. They invest in healthcare. They're able to make the family and the community stronger for the generations to come. And the example in Jackson, Mississippi, Magnolia Mothers Trust, it's a cash transfer of it was a cash transfer initially of $1,000 a month for 12 months to single mothers living in Jackson. And after that period of time, 80% of the mothers had materially improved their housing situation, and more than 40 had had a significant change in their career status, whether it was a promotion, a new job, or an increase in salary. Think about what that is, $1,000 a month for 12 months, and you're able to see such a significant impact. And it's just this idea that women know what to do with the capital to make change. And they don't need to be told, and they don't need to be given kind of instructions that once you give money to women and they're able to allocate capital, they do it effectively. And that's been something that we've seen really from an exciting perspective on the philanthropic side. And then are we focused on philanthropic
Let's
right
stay
now?
on philanthropic for a minute, because, I mean, you would say that in some ways, we'll get there, but there's a bridge to that, because it's actually a whole different story about the risk and thinking process about de-risking investment in capital markets for women. And I want to fully embrace the philanthropic moment first, and then we'll bridge into that part of it. So let's do the philanthropic piece as well for you in terms of when you think about more money in the hands of women as philanthropic investors. How has that worked for you so far? How's it going?
Yeah, I mean, it's worked across the board. I'm actually only here at the Aspen Ideas Festival because women that are in this room have invested in me to be here, right? And along the way and along the journey. And so the work that we do at Black Ambition, which was founded by Pharrell Williams, the majority of the entrepreneurs that we invest in, about 60% of them are women and women-led startups. And so we see the returns, we see being the good steward of the resources more in the female founders that we invest in, but then we also see them become employers faster, which is a big focus of ours, right? And so there was a Harvard study that came out a few years ago that talked about in order to increase the opportunities from a diversity standpoint, specifically as it relates to the Black community, getting job opportunities, in order to increase that, you first have to increase the number of Black entrepreneurs that are starting successful companies and have enough cash flow so that they can actually become employers, because we know that we are oftentimes the first ones to give the first opportunity to people that look like us from a job standpoint. And so increasing the number of female-founded startups is also going to have a ripple effect in making sure that there is a direct financial contribution and acceleration of wealth back into our communities. And so, when we think about wealth, the gap is actually widening. It's not actually decreasing, even with all the efforts focused on that. My mentor always says to me, money screams, but wealth whispers. And that's just the reality of it, right? Like the pathways to wealth, oftentimes people are just not sharing the codes as it relates to Black entrepreneurs and specifically Black female founders.
One thing I just want to add in when we talked about in the prep is the statistic of only 1.8% of philanthropic giving globally being focused on women and girls organizations. And to the points that both of you brought up about how effective that is and how that generates kind of multiple levels of return, that's something that's just not rational and needs to change, even because of the fact that we've seen all of this incredible impact when it is done effectively. 1.8%, I mean, that's insane. It's less than 2%, obviously.
Does that statistic, I mean, it's not just enraging, it's just confounding to you, it sounds like. Like, how can that still be the case when you look at the outcomes from the kinds of work? And I'm wondering if any of you have a sense of why is that number so sticky and so small? Like, it can't just be because there isn't a lack of evidence. There's got to be something else about implicit biases. I wonder if you might want to just share some of that.
Sure. I mean, you have to think about, philanthropists are always motivated by something. And while a lot of us talk about the evaluation, many people don't necessarily look at all the outcomes. I mean, just like we've talked about, women tend to have an outsized impact, whether it's, if they're leading a nonprofit or serving women and girls in their nonprofit, or if they're a business. We know that, that's a fact. There's data to support that. But if my network is rather limited, if I'm not actively seeking out those methods to support women, or most importantly, I think there's more risk in that investment. I don't trust that women are competent enough. When women walk into the room, especially a room of wealth, it's often, are they a spouse, daughter, mother, as opposed to owning that space? So that trust, that my expectation of women or people of color, many people are driven by that implicit bias that will, when funders are often talking to women-led nonprofits or Black-led nonprofits, there tend to be many, many, many more questions about the effectiveness of this. Who's on your team? Have you considered this? And many more suggestions operationally that you wouldn't necessarily be sort of suggesting to other leaders in that space. So I think we have to just recognize that even though the data, and this is true for DEI, is clear in terms of outsized performance, people still are held back by their belief and their lack of trust in the competence and success of women and people of color.
Yeah. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Dalila said it much nicer than I will say it. Racism and sexism are a hell of a drug. Like, people are just who they are, and it's unfortunate, right? Because if that is what fuels your lived experience, you will never see value in our communities in the way that you should in order to put your money where it is to have the returns that you should have, right? I always use the example of, you look at crowdfunding, right? We have crowdfunded in the Black community for centuries. It's called passing the plate in the Black church every single Sunday. That is how peers have come together with a fraction of money here and there to fund the scholarship campaign, to fund the infrastructure of the church. And churches are the nucleus of Black communities. They are also the largest landholders in Black communities as well. So there is a huge, not only business community that exists in that, but there's a huge wealth that exists in that ownership as well. But I give you that example because that's what happens in Black churches every single day. We have funded our own problems, right, incrementally. If you look at the Caribbean, it's called Susu. If you go to the continent of Africa for generations, it's called Partner in the Caribbean, and Susu on the continent of Africa. So we have always solved our problems in our communities. So tell me what the difference is between that and Kickstarter or Indiegogo or I always call it the funeral crowdfunding platform, but that's not what it's called. GoFundMe, y'all know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Why do people use that instead of life insurance? But that's a whole other issue. And so we've always solved our problems, right? But if you only look to diverse communities for the obstacles and never the opportunities, you would never be first money into an opportunity that we have now seen. And this isn't saying that these platforms that I'm mentioning have gone into Black communities and stolen the ideas, but the idea existed long before the tech bubble of this, right, and the tech opportunity and the massive injections of capital. So you have to ask yourself, what is the difference? It's not for a lack of ideas for women. It's not for a lack of ideas for the Black community. It's for a lack of the right level of resources and the right level of investment. And you deny yourself of being able to take advantage of that if you only look at it from the lens of, I don't think that there's any value there. Well, guess what? 400 years ago, you thought there was a lot of value in our bodies and a lot of value in what we can do. And so there's still the value in what we can contribute, but it requires a respectable amount of funding and resources, and it requires our allies to put their money to back up those ideas in the absence of people that are doing it for other reasons.
Thank you. One of the reasons this is an important conversation now is when we look at that pipeline of new wealth transfer that's going to happen. And just what are the conversations that need to happen that aren't just about the data, but about opening people's eyes to what are the opportunities. And that those aren't just in the philanthropic piece. So I want to switch because, Brynne, one of the other things we talked about was it's not just that it's just 1.8% of philanthropic dollars that go into women-led and women-focused enterprises. It's also the same when it comes to capital allocation for entrepreneurship and business startup and business growth. And in some ways, that's got another layer of biases, complications, infrastructure, investor issues that we're up against. So as I think about that as when I talked about earlier, we'll think about women as owners of capital, but when you think about women as recipients of capital on the enterprise side, I wonder if you could share a little bit from each of your perspectives on what it is that you invest in terms of the ways that you incubate and grow women's businesses, and what you see in terms of the outcomes that make that, for you, a really valuable proposition, both when it comes to actual capital market returns and when it comes to the broader economy that you're contributing to. And again, I don't know, Brynne, if you want to start that one, feel free.
Sure. So as was mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Hobby, which is the largest residential technology platform in Latin America. And to date, we have raised close to $650 million between debt and equity. So I've had extensive experience being the recipient of capital from an institutional perspective throughout the last almost 5 years. And what I have found to be really interesting is a lot of this subconscious bias that was mentioned, as well as times kind of like overt, blunt, out in the open bias, which I actually prefer sometimes because at least then you know what's going on and you can figure out how to navigate it. But what I think is really powerful is the example of Inspired Capital, which is the fund that led my Series A, which is a fund that was co-founded by Alexa Von Tobel, who's a former entrepreneur, and by Penny Pritzker, who many of you know, who's involved with the Institute often. And I was part of their first fund, and they've since raised subsequent funds that were wildly oversubscribed, which indicates that the performance in the first fund was excellent. And they have set out just to be the best investors in the world. And with that in mind, the number of female-founded companies that they had in their first fund was more than 2x what is in an average VC fund. So they come to the table with less bias and more awareness about the opportunities that exist, and they're just seeking the best founders and the best companies, and it results in 2 times the amount of money going to women. So in the same as the examples when you give people money from a philanthropic perspective, I think is when you give it from the for-profit perspective, you get better financial results and more equitable outcomes when women are the allocators of capital. And that's what makes me really excited about what you mentioned, which is the generational wealth transfer. That's not enough. Like, it shouldn't just be people who are coming into wealth and are then going to be able to allocate it. It should be fulfilled at all areas of society. But I hope that that will have better impacts versus what we've seen in the last few years.
And I mean, just in terms of access to capital, I mean, when you think about VC funding or even just traditional lending, women and people of color are typically getting a lower loan amount than they request, right? 25% to a third of what they actually request. And they're getting it at higher interest rates with a lot more strings attached to it. So, when you add up all those biases together, I think this is a higher risk entity, right? Because I don't trust it, I'm not sure the competence is there, but I'm giving you less to get it done, and I'm expecting greater results. Even with all of that, women-owned businesses and businesses owned by people of color outperform. So that's a dynamic I think we all have to just recognize. But I also think it's just important to note that during COVID, we knew that women-owned businesses owned by people of color were the most likely to be shut down, right? Because they were considered non-essential by the government. Many of them had to close their doors, operate from home, and you're already operating on less capital to begin with, which sort of prompted the program we started called Comcast Rise, which focuses on small businesses. So to date, we've helped over 13,000 small businesses across the country. 90% of those business owners have been people of color. 55% have been women, and most of those actually women of color. So in addition to grant funding, also providing them with mentoring and coaching, which is another aspect that many business owners, again, both women and people of color, they feel like they get there, they launch their businesses, and they don't have people crowding around them to offer that operational advice, that strategic advice that's helpful. Not sort of critiquing the decisions they've made and who else is on their team, but really being supportive and helping them access more capital. And then we open up our media platforms to make sure those businesses have advertising space. And I think that's another point of this. You have to figure out all the different tools at your disposal. Even investing in, a lot of the products we have at our events are provided by many of the entrepreneurs in that program. So we had chocolate therapy we gave out to our dinner guests, another Rise supporter. I think it's important to, again, leverage all those different platforms because you're creating different spaces for those entrepreneurs to have some light.
And you've been incredibly creative, I have to say, with the number of tools you're putting in that enabling environment toolbox for the work that you're doing. Felecia, before we move on, I think you said something when we were prepping as well about another part of the return, which is when you are investing in women's businesses, what kind of growth and what kind of employment, what kind of businesses are growing, and so what's another dimension of the opportunity to invest in women-owned businesses that you see as something that folks may not know?
Yeah, with Black Ambition, we've invested in 101 companies over the past 3 years. And what we've seen is an average of 4 new employees hired for every one company that we invest in, which is amazing for what we've seen in the past 3 years. And then also knowing that these companies are ripe for growing and scaling when they get the right level of support, level of community, level of capital. I think one of the things that would help those efforts is also the story that we tell, and then how we use data and making sure that we're not weaponizing data against Black entrepreneurs specifically, and then women entrepreneurs, right? And so when we started the conversation, we talked about the net worth of Black women being only $1,700. Well, if we only tell that story, then why would I invest in someone that it makes it feel like, well, they aren't a good steward of capital? They don't know how to find the opportunity to be able to grow and scale their net worth. And if we only use the negative data set around Black women and Black entrepreneurs, then we don't get a chance to talk about, well, they are not only some of the largest graduates of college, they are entering C-suite positions in the past 3 years, and with a force to be reckoned with. Yeah. Retention is a whole other thing, but we're seeing those opportunities. And then the other part of that is we've seen Black women be the fastest growing sector of new entrepreneurs. And so if we only tell the negative, we don't ever give anyone an opportunity to shape a different story about how can I be a part of that upswing? And that is necessary, the storytelling component, because it helps change the narrative as if this is a good investment, can I trust this or not? We all know that we only deploy capital, I don't care what anyone says, to people that we know, we like, and we trust. And if I don't ever trust you, to be a good steward of capital, I'm never going to invest in you because I'll never believe that I get a return. And so it's the responsibility of all of us to arm ourselves with much better data about women and especially the Black community, because there is very positive data.
Yeah.
You know, when you think about the story that was told about the Black community and entrepreneurs during the pandemic, 40% of Black businesses closed during the pandemic and they will now open. Yes, that is a real reality, and that's unfortunate, especially for the work that we do. But if we're not responsible, what we don't tell is 60% of Black businesses survived one of the hardest economic challenges of their lifetime. And if we don't get to tell that story, we then don't get to study, well, what equipped them to be able to survive one of the most challenging moments in all of our lived experiences in our lives? 60% of Black businesses were equipped to be able to survive and not only thrive. And so like my imperative around investing in women is also making sure we just arm ourselves with the right data to be able to inform our investment decisions and then also others.
Well, and I'll name that for myself, you know, and cheers, all of this. I did the same thing, right? I just did the same thing now. I was gonna frame this up. I'm in you get in a trope of people respond to dire statistics, but really people don't. People respond to hope and opportunity. Like, so I guess, you know, the piece to jump into here, you named trust. We talked a lot in our own conversations, but we need to talk a lot more publicly about what really are factors of risk and what really is the issue of trust when it comes to not just the numbers of an investment strategy, but you know, what goes on in your own decision-making processes that you think other people may or may not be doing right now. So just say a little bit more on the issues of trust and risk in this entire domain.
I mean, we shouldn't underestimate, though, the power of social capital. I mean, some of you may have seen some of Raj Chetty's research that he's previewing, sort of the next stage of that, and it talks about how much social factor is key. Social capital is a factor in economic mobility. So the data might be here, right? We just talked through several aspects of the data that are both alarming and you can see the opportunities there. But the fact is most people rely on their immediate circle to make decisions, right? Do I know you enough to trust you? Or are you just a statistic, right? The $1,700. So who am I engaging, intentionally building relationship with in my circle so I can make better decisions? Do I have women and people on my boards? Am I, when I'm thinking about my philanthropic strategy or my investment strategy, am I bringing diverse perspectives so that I get a better outcome at the end of the day? Or am I trusting, 10 people that have the same experience I do and might not be adding to the conversation? And I think that intentionality of, are we building network with people that we agree or disagree with, is always going to keep those markets closed.
Have you seen examples of that as you've built your own, because you're also leading DEI work, examples of someone that has come in that has either had it because they've been exposed to folks who don't see this as risky, have had a change of heart, or like when I think about growing the number of folks who we de-risk this kind of an investment strategy for, like how has that worked for you in your domain?
I mean, I can speak to it from a number of different angles. I think, so I recently joined a bank board, and one of our board members at Comcast, Madeline Bell, who some of you may know, she's the CEO of CHOP, just an incredible leader in so many different ways. She saw the announcement, first person to call me, and she was like, let me tell you what you need to do when you get on that board. She was like, first of all, don't wait to speak. Nobody in that room is smarter than you are. She was like, when I joined my first corporate board, I was silent at first and then figured I had to find my voice. But she was like, then I realized, they ask dumb questions all the time. Some of them weren't even prepped. And she was like, and I know you're going to do all of that, but sometimes our tendency is to be quiet. And she was just really thoughtful and sort of helping me understand how to best navigate that room. So I think that intentional allyship happens in small ways and in big ways in the corporate environment. Most people want to be allies and see themselves as allies, but they haven't actually validated that they're serving as a true ally to the people around them, and I think that's important. So I think that proximity from a social capital perspective is important. Yeah. Am I intentional about, the different ways I can support people in that network?
Yeah. Brynne, do you want to add into this?
I think all of those points are really good, and it actually reminded me from the opposite perspective of preparing women to be able to earn that trust and to have that social capital. one of the programs that the McNulty Foundation runs are these McNulty Scholars, which is investing in women in STEM programs at universities, including Hunter and St. Joseph's. And in addition to the tuition and helping, obviously, them get through the schooling, there's so much around which is much more important for a later stage in life, which is teaching them soft skills, getting them access to the most important internships, getting them invited to conferences that are really relevant so that they can start to build those networks that position them to be trusted when it comes time for them to be chosen for research positions or PhD programs. And 90% of the girls who have gone through the program, now women, have gone on to get PhDs, MDs, or both. We have a number of honors like Fulbright Scholars and others. And this program actually at St. Joseph's University proved to the school the value of investing in women and getting them mentors. It got better faculty coming into the school because they saw how the program was evolving, and now they've earned multi-million scholarships or grants, I guess, from the NSF. So it just goes to show that building out all of the things around how someone is perceived in the corporate world and what those connections are and how trust can be built so that people can back check them, so people see that they have the appropriate experience, so a mentor can give them the advice like you just said, which normally women don't have access to. When I've been raising money for Hobby, I call my husband's friends who work at VC firms, or I call my husband's friends who are founders of multi-billion-dollar companies, and I ask them how to negotiate term sheets. Because I just don't have peers, particularly in Latin America, where, as you said, there are very, 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 very few female founders. I know all of them, at least in the Spanish-speaking region. And it's hard, and it's hard not to have that network of people. I'm lucky because through business school and through my husband and his friends who have done well, I'm able to tap into those, but we need to build more systematic ways for people who otherwise don't have access to that to get those specific connections and those learnings to be able to answer questions, position themselves in rooms, speak up when it's appropriate, because otherwise they're not going to get the space to do so.
Well, one of the things that I'm struck by is that all three of you are successfully building synthetic networks to do exactly what you're talking about, Brynne, that you're able to do, find your network. And one of the mechanisms—
I wouldn't call them synthetic.
Well,
I would say
yes.
that there's an incredible value for, right, the women who are in it, who are finding different ways to make it work. But it's needed, right? So
Yes.
It's not synthetic, it's not a parallel network, it's a network that works not because we're women, but because we're damn good at what we do.
Yeah, I only meant it cheers. I was not meaning to say otherwise. I was mainly trying to say you're using a prize function in each of your work as a mechanism to lift up the positive stories and then to create a growing network of people who are seeing each other as resources. And you're building not just a prize function into this, but another set of pieces to that. So it was a lead into that piece, not meaning that it was in any way artificial or not deserving. So I just wonder, though, but you each landed on that piece of your strategy independently, and I'm wondering a little bit about how that's working. Describe it to people. Is it part of a way to kind of like punch above the weight when we look at that 1.8% investment? We're trying to like crowd in more through that process. So just a little bit of how the prize functions for each of you and what you have seen as the benefits of that as just something that we unpack here. Because I think other people here, as we look at the tools and strategies, there's a lot to learn from the three of you.
Yeah, I can chime in on that. I mean, the way that Black Ambition— there's a few reasons as to why it was stood up by Pharrell, but he was an X-Prize winner quite a few years ago, and kind of looked across the landscape and said, no one in the room really looks like me. And so what would it look like for me to create an opportunity for Black, Hispanic, and HBCU entrepreneurs to take out the friction as much as possible for them to get capital as fast as possible? And so our prize and our pitch competitions, we've been challenged over the years, right? Because it's just like, why are pitch competitions still relevant, right? Is there another way in which you can deploy capital? Yeah, there are a ton of ways in which you can do it. But you have to think about pitch competitions, while most people have moved on for them, for the longest, pitch competitions were only for a very specific set of entrepreneurs. And so Black entrepreneurs, women, Hispanic entrepreneurs were never given the opportunity to get through the application process, the selection process, to get on that stage to not only pitch for capital, but the exposure to the people that were in the room. So while it may feel old in the startup industry, it's new for the entrepreneurs in which we serve. It also serves as a way to get them capital faster, because when we talk about closing the wealth gap, well, wealth has a need for speed. And what people have become too comfortable with is actually wasting the time of Black and brown entrepreneurs. The vetting process is longer than it is for most people. The application process is long. Every single organization like mine that supports entrepreneurs has a different application but asks the exact same questions, and then we're wondering why the entrepreneur doesn't have as much traction. Well, they're filling out 20 different applications. So like, how do we make that process easier for them as well? But like, how do we get them capital as fast as possible so that they even have the luxury to be able to innovate? And so the prize for us is set up in that way to be able to get them the capital as fast as possible, take the friction out of the process in the beginning, and then on the back end, once we fund them, then we literally walk them through the door to the right mentors. Like, not the mentors that just say, you're doing a good job, or change these few things on your pitch deck, but if I am mentoring you and you have a CPG company and all you're doing is giving me advice, but the buyer at Target for the industry that you're in is in your phone, and you never pick up the phone to make that phone call, do not come to Black Ambition. That is not the type of entrepreneur that is helpful to our entrepreneurs, because we need you to conflate the time between, I have a good idea, I have traction, how quickly can I get on the shelves? How quickly can you make that introduction for me, that warm introduction for me, so that I can get that capital, because I don't necessarily have the network, but you do. And if you trust me and you truly believe me enough, then you gotta make the introductions. And that is the difference between the two. We had a company, really quick, Femly, in a feminine hygiene space, really amazing company. I think they've been through a number of people's programs that are even in this room. For 2 years, they were knocking on Marriott's door, could not get in. I had one conversation with Pharrell. I was like, you're friends with the owner. Can you make this phone call? Within 2 phone calls, she got her product into Marriott. We need more of that. Because what happens is, that's 2 phone calls as opposed to 2 years. How can we give her 2 years back? Because time is not money. Time is infinitely more valuable than money. Money can be remade, can be reprinted, that's a whole other story. But like, if someone wastes your time, you never get that back. And so making sure that people appreciate and value the time of our entrepreneurs, make the introductions, give them the capital, and if you can't do any of those things, get out of their way.
That's great.
So I think the prize that we give is through the Aspen Global Leadership Network, called the McNulty Prize, and we focus on leaders who are solving the most difficult problems of our time. It is not actually focused specifically on women, though we have a tremendous number of women who do win. And some of the examples that I gave before in the Himalayas, in Jackson, Mississippi, in Guatemala, and around the world are women who are investing in their communities or creating the space for female entrepreneurship to then catalyze this type of change. But a lot of the benefit of the prize, I think, is this idea of elevating voices, which is the thread that we talked about with why we need more women allocating capital and more women in important positions as examples to others, or we need mentors who are making those calls, and elevating their voices, sharing more about their success stories, giving them access to media, training them appropriately, giving them some of those connections in the industry. Those types of things are able to happen when you have this prize, everyone applies, and then there's so much excitement about the winners, and then that gives them this pedestal on which to be able to access all of these different things. But I think this idea of elevating voices is really, really important, and we can talk about some of the other ways in which each of us does that. But I think we all lack sufficient examples of women as allocators of capital, or women as kind of titans in different spaces of our world that are important for both younger generations of men and women and girls and boys to see. It shouldn't just be about telling women that they can be successful. It should be for everyone to know that those people who are changing the spaces in which we learn, live, and grow are not just men who've made money in the past.
Yeah, I think what's important about the prize concept, and I talked a little bit about Rise earlier, is that one, it's just based on this concept that great ideas, innovation, creativity, and economic opportunity can be anywhere, not just 10 people I know and 2 degrees from that. So it's sort of the invitation that we know they're out there, even if we don't know you, even if we're always in these spaces. I mean, there are many women doing amazing things that no one in this room knows. So how do we find them? So one, I think it helps change that narrative a bit. 2, when they do get that opportunity, to the point, how do you tell that story so it becomes the norm as opposed to this special thing had to happen to elevate voices? Felicia's actually the host of a documentary we're releasing called Culture Capital that features several entrepreneurs, including founders that have been part of Lift Labs, which is an incubator that we have at Comcast. I think Laura is here somewhere. She runs that. And so it celebrates many different entrepreneurs in different spaces, from creative, they've had sports tech folks, gaming, et cetera. And so it gives them another platform to tell their story. The one thing I think it's important, though, especially for women and people of color, a lot of times, in whether it's an incubator or a capital raise, they sort of get one infusion. But that access to capital, those barriers get higher the more you grow as women and people of color. And so you have to be more creative as you grow in employee revenue capital base to get more capital. And that challenges, sometimes people are fine helping, supporting micro lending that's helping people abroad, but don't necessarily think about the entrepreneurs that are here in the US or vice versa. And I just think we have to recognize that challenge exists up and down the capital stack and size of business.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a point that I feel like we're finding more and more people in a space of maybe early stage, right? At least it's been a conversation about it. But you're right, when you start to go farther up into like your Series B or like even just broader sets of things, there's real gaps in the capital, both debt and equity, right, in those larger amounts. And again, probably for some of the same reasons in terms of trust and risk that
correct,
that you all are
I actually think what you mentioned, and both of you are working on, is this idea of telling the story. And that is, to me, the most important skill that someone needs to be able to access capital. You need to be able to have a compelling reason as to why your business or your idea or you as an entrepreneur are the best person in the entire world to do the thing that you're setting out to do. And I think the skill of learning how to tell a story in a compelling way and adapting it to the people to whom you're telling it is something that's really hard. And you giving people that skill set, both of you giving people that skill set and the platform with which to share it in the appropriate channels the impact of that cannot be underestimated. Yep. Because that really is the thing that allows people to do well or not, in my opinion, more than anything else.
Yeah, this is great. I'd love to see if there's any questions or insights from the room itself. We'll come back around to a lightning round for you all, but I'm just curious if there's some questions. And there's a microphone. I see somebody right here, and then there's a couple of folks right here. So let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and take one at a time, but we'll be short and brief in our answers.
Good morning, and thank you for this very compelling conversation. I'm a journalist by trade, and so I've been in the business for many years, and still, ... It's been a little bit of an uphill battle, and I wonder what your thoughts are. I'm hearing so much about the encouragement of women helping women, but what about the women who are heading up the ladder and when you're right behind them are kicking you in the face or holding you down from letting you go up with them, or at least giving you that hand up? Because that's very real too.
And it feels personally real, I'm hearing, yeah.
I mean, one, I think what we all have to recognize is when you're in so many rooms, when you're the only, sometimes the narrative leads us to believe that we have to compete with one another because only one of us is going to get that spot. But I don't necessarily want to discredit that person because they're a product of their environment, right? And so there are always going to be people who will work against that. I think it's up to us, though, to recognize as much as we are struggling, there are many more people who are struggling that we can help. And when people start to see you creating that space and inviting some of those conversations and being supportive, you don't have to worry about those women, but be empathetic to those women, and hopefully they will make that shift at some point, but they're right feeding into this narrative. People may have even told them they need to do that to be successful. So show people another frame of success. There should be multiple of us at every level, all the way up to the highest level. And I think we just have to continue to promote that. And we will get there. It's taking way longer than it should. But, to Felicia's point about being cautious with our time, which is our most valuable resource, don't waste your time on people who are not there for you.
Yeah. I'd love to share a quick quote that a mentor of mine said to me when I was dealing with corporate sabotage, and just, it's a part of the process. It's going to happen. And what he said to me is, disruption always follows your best intentions. And if you don't realize that, you'll quit in the middle of your assignment. So it's going to happen, not just from women, but all different aspects. When you know in your heart you're on a path that is much bigger than you, that's higher to serve us and people that you care about the most, disruption is going to happen, and you have to recognize it. Otherwise, it will stop you in the middle of like this bigger path that you were on.
Thank you. So much applause. I love the applause. Let's go ahead and take both other questions, and you can field those, and we'll wrap this on time.
I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but first of all, thank you for this great conversation. My name is Loretta McCarthy, and I run an organization called Golden Seeds, and we invest only in women-led companies. And I want to make a comment on the comments about intergenerational transfer of wealth, because sometimes when I'm in these conversations, this and others, there's kind of this feeling that women are just sort of waiting to inherit all this wealth, and then we're going to be generous and do things for women. And I just want to make the point that we now have multiple generations of women, if you do the demographic generations, who have made their own wealth. Yeah. They have the capital, they have the skills, they have the professional networks that some of you have mentioned, to be able to do this work without just kind of waiting to inherit it. Maybe they'll inherit some too, but it's so much to the point that of the 330,000 angel investors in the United States, 40% of them today are women. Mm-hmm. So women have jumped in to participate in very substantial ways at whatever level they can. So I just wouldn't want to wait until they inherit.
No, I love it. It's an addition to the narrative of the framing we're using. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we talked about this earlier, because it's also, Felecia mentioned this in one of our programs, who's invited to be an angel investor? And how many women and people of color are successful and never get invited to that table? And so how do we create, more stories about that work that's happening every day, and it doesn't feel like it's just waiting for that inheritance?
And get access to the good deal flow.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You can be willing to give checks, but if you're not going to see the best companies, it's more difficult to be successful in that space.
Mm-hmm. Last question?
Yeah, yesterday I saw the Peter Thiel discussion, and he talked about building empires, and that investing in restaurants and small businesses was not what the tech bros do, right? But I guess what I'm saying is that they have this belief system that they want empires, or even to conquer the entire world and be multi-billionaires, which serves no one, right? And I also think that this disparity in wealth is exacerbated by the lack of corporate taxes that then disinvest in the communities that used to be invested in by many, right? So I see in the beginning you talked about how women spend money differently and telling the story, so that's very compelling. So how do we tell the story that the tech bros are wrong, women are right, we should invest in women, and they're destroying the world and they're destroying democracy?
Well, this is on tape, so we're going to replay you a couple of times there. I think that's great, and it's actually the great final provocative question to put to you all in some ways, which is, I actually don't need to translate that more, but you right now have this platform for voice, and you have many other platforms. If it's either a call to action, your biggest hope, or the thing you're most frustrated about, please feel free to opine briefly on it as we close the session. And certainly we can find each other and have more, because I think for all of us, it's not okay for this just to be a conversation in one or two rooms. It's really the place where we want to keep building it. So Feel free to close us out, ladies.
I mean, listen, I think as much risk as people might think there is in investing in women and people of color, there's a much greater risk to all of us, the global economy, of not investing in women and people of color. And I think there's many, many, many data points that point to that. But I would encourage everybody here, I mean, there are countless opportunities where you're thinking philanthropically. We have a great partner, Reboot Representation, that invests in women in the computer science field, especially where there's underrepresentation, Black, Latino, Indigenous. So there's many entry points for everyone, and I encourage everybody to seek those out and just think about the economic opportunity, just the opportunity for our communities to grow collectively is huge. So the negative will always find people, and I would just encourage people to look at the overwhelming amount of data on the positive side. This is an economic opportunity for the entire world, and we should all be a part of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, I agree. I think that the data overwhelmingly shows that when money's put in the hands of women, good things happen, and we should all find ways to do that in a number of kind of different channels, whether, as you said, it's philanthropically or investing. And if you don't feel that you have the capacity to do it on your own, find organizations that do it really well and support them. But I mean, I think everyone's leaving here with it's a no-brainer that this should be happening more at scale in your home communities and around the world, and we should all just find ways to do it more.
Yeah. Small businesses are the underbelly of our society and community, and so I love lifestyle businesses, I love side hustles, I love the gig economy. It serves its purpose, it always will. And I think if you are looking for amazing deal flow, just go to the Black Ambition website, look at our 3 years of entrepreneurs, and write some checks. That's what my
I
ask
also
is.
accept checks.
Yes.
If anyone's wondering, for my female-owned business.
Yeah.
Felecia, Brynne, Dalila, thank you so much. And you all, thanks for joining us today, and looking forward to the rest of the conversation. Cheers.
Thank you.